I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. This man right here is Tyreek Hill. And you might remember that a few years ago, the Kansas City Chiefs traded him away to the Miami Dolphins in exchange for draft capital. Now, I want you to imagine that the Dolphins feel as though Tyreek Hill needs to go. It's just time for a change. Obviously, the man has put up monster numbers thus far with the Dolphins and led the league in receiving yards in 2023. But it's just time for both parties to move on and split. The Chiefs are interested in bringing Hill back. They need a receiver, they know that Hill knows the offense, and they want to bring the man back to where he began his career. So, in a normal world, you'd have the Dolphins trade Hill to the Chiefs, and the Chiefs would give up something in return. There would be no middleman, there would be no extra steps, and there would be no hassle. This is a move made solely between the Dolphins and the Chiefs, and that's it. However, I want you to imagine in this universe that the Dolphins decide to release Tyreek Hill and tell the other 30 teams in the league, hey, so we want Hill to go to the Chiefs, so we need all of you to not put in a claim and try to sign the guy. We want Kansas City to pick him up, and then Kansas City will give up some draft picks. But we're going to release him and have him go from the Dolphins to the Chiefs that way. So please cooperate with us in making this happen. You would think to yourself, wait a second, time out. Why? Why go through that extra step for no reason? Why even leave that to chance? Why would any team possibly cooperate with that request? Instead of just trading Hill from the Dolphins to the Chiefs, you're going to release him, have him sign with the Chiefs, and then have the Chiefs send you the appropriate compensation? That seems really stupid and convoluted and ridiculous. Well, I bring that up because this man right here is New York Giants quarterback Gary Wood. I talked about him briefly in another video of mine, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, after spending a season with the New Orleans Saints, the Giants wanted to bring their 8th round pick from Cornell back home where he belonged in the Empire State. And the way they went about this was downright bizarre, to the point where it deserves a deep dive 60 years later. Because in trying to get Gary Wood to get traded from the Saints to the Giants, it wasn't really a trade, so much as it was a convoluted process that needs to be dissected here because of just how ridiculous it was. Because this is the story behind one of the strangest trades in NFL history that you've probably never heard of before. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you might not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff and you want to learn more and join this community, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and for joining the community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the giant trade that seemed like a giant mess. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand just who this man right here, Gary Wood, is, and why he left the Giants in the first place. Wood got drafted by the Giants in the 8th round of the 1964 NFL Draft, and the man who was born in New York, went to high school in New York, and went to college in New York, going to Cornell in the Ivy League, was going to be playing at the next level in New York. Wood was primarily a backup during his first 3 seasons, backing up Y.A. Tittle in 1964 and Earl Morrall in 1965 and 1966. And while he did have his moments, everything fell apart during the 1966 season, which you've learned more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. In 1966, the New York Giants went 1-12-1, finishing the year with the worst record in football. And besides their historically bad defense that allowed roughly 36 points per game, including an NFL regular season record 72 points in one game against Washington, one of the reasons was the play of this man right here, Gary Wood. He did not have a good season for the Giants under center, nor did anyone, as the man threw just 6 touchdowns on 13 interceptions, with a touchdown-to-interception ratio of 1-2, a completion percentage of 47.6%, well below the league-wide average, and a passer rating of 49.7, well below the league-wide average, hovering over 67. Of the 15 quarterbacks in 1966 to throw at least 170 passes, Wood was third from the bottom in passer rating, which gives you an idea of his struggles that season. And the Giants did not win a game with him as the starting quarterback. Despite his struggles, Wood had his moments though, and the Giants had every intention of keeping him around in 1967. However, in 1967, the NFL would be adding one new team to the league, with the New Orleans Saints joining via expansion. And each existing team could only protect a certain number of players, with the rest being unprotected and being available to the Saints if they so desired. We see this every time there's an expansion team entering the league, and this was no exception. The Giants decided to leave Gary Wood unprotected, thinking that there was no way, after how poor he looked in 1966, that the Saints would possibly go for the youngster, especially because they could get another quarterback. However, the Saints stunned the Giants and decided to take Wood to be their backup quarterback. Giants head coach Ali Sherman was stunned by this, saying, "Wood is the one who surprised me." And some fans, amazingly enough, were furious at this and felt that this was the straw that broke the camel's back with how much they were fed up with the Giants' incompetence, which, I'm not gonna lie, I sort of love. It would almost be like if an expansion team joined the NFL today. The Saints left Spencer Rattler unprotected, Rattler got taken, and Saints fans collectively said, "Yep, that's it. This team's incompetent. I'm done." You're hitching your ride to Spencer Rattler. Bizarre. Still, after 3 seasons in New York, and after starting a handful of games, Gary Wood's time with the Giants was over. At least, momentarily. Because the Saints found out very quickly that they didn't really need Wood on the team. In 1967, Wood only threw 11 passes, a drastic departure from his 1966 season with the Giants, where he threw 170 passes and started 6 games. Whereas the Saints split their starts between Gary Quazzo and Billy Kilmer, Wood was just idly sitting around as the third stringer, hence why there are no highlights of Wood in a Saints uniform. Wood threw a pass in just 2 games during the 1967 season, with one of those games being a complete mop-up duty in Week 3 during a 42-7 loss to the Cleveland Browns. And after the 1967 season, entering 1968, the Saints had a plethora of quarterbacks on their team. They still had Billy Kilmer, they acquired someone from the Detroit Lions in a trade, and they spent their 5th-round pick on a quarterback, taking Ronnie Lee South, the promising Arkansas signal caller who finished the 1967 season second in the entire Southwest Conference in touchdown passes. This is all to say that Gary Wood didn't quite work out with the Saints as well as they possibly envisioned when they got him in the expansion draft. And there were too many cooks in the kitchen at quarterback, with Wood looking like the odd one out. And the New York Giants, with Ali Sherman still as the head coach somehow, wanted to get Wood back, especially after their backup quarterback from 1967, Earl Morrall, went to the Baltimore Colts for the 1968 season, where he would back up Johnny Unitas and do absolutely nothing of note that year whatsoever that deserves recognition all these years later, like win MVP and get the Colts to the Super Bowl or something like that. Sherman never wanted to lose Wood in the expansion draft. Now, needing a backup quarterback, this was his chance to get him back. Time for the Giants and the Saints to make a trade. Now you might be saying, okay, so the Saints will trade Gary Wood back to the Giants, and the Giants will send over whatever compensation is necessary to complete the trade, which in this case was a 5th-round pick in 1969. Seems easy enough, right? Seems like this should be a non-story and relatively run-of-the-mill. Well, this is where things get bizarre. Because you see, NFL rules at the time prohibited the Giants and the Saints from doing this. Today, no such rule exists, but back in 1968, once a drafted player left the team, the original team could not trade to get him back. In other words, the Giants drafted Gary Wood themselves in 1964. If the Giants gave up his rights by releasing him, or by trading him somewhere else, or by leaving him unprotected, the only way that the Giants could get Wood back is if he was a free agent. They could not trade for him. You might be thinking to yourself, what is the point of this rule? This seems like a really stupid rule. Going back to that example I said at the top of the video, you're telling me that if the Chiefs wanted Tyreek Hill back, the only way they could get him back was if he was a free agent and they couldn't make a trade with the Dolphins to acquire his services again? Well, I've got some theories as to why this rule existed. Number one was to encourage the development of your own players, especially considering the fact that back in 1960, there was no free agency and there was no salary cap. Once you had a player, you had them for life until you wanted to get rid of them. I guess the idea behind this was if you wanted to get rid of someone, you better be awfully sure, because if they blossom somewhere else, you can't get him back. It's like if a girl is attracted to you, but you're not into her whatsoever. Then 3 years later, she's making a lot of money and looks hotter to you, and you change your mind and you want to pursue her. Too late, you had your chance, and you blew it. Number two was to prevent super teams, if that makes sense. Remember that back in the 1960s, you had to win your division in order to make it to the playoffs. It was first place or nothing. And this meant that there were legitimately teams that were out of the running by week 3. There were teams who, in September, knew that even if they ran the table the rest of the way, that they could not make it to the playoffs. Because of this, I suppose there was a real possibility that a team out of the running could make a deal to loan one of their players to a good team, and for that team to return the player back to his original team after the season was done. Almost like the reverse of how loaning works in soccer. Again, these are just two possible justifications for why this rule was in place back then. And if you have any other theories or ideas, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. But that was the gist of how everything worked back then. This rule is not in place anymore, thank God. But based on how the game worked in 1968, Gary Wood could not be directly traded from the Saints to the Giants. The only way he could become a Giant again was if he was released from the Saints and no team wanted to pick him up. And this led to something that would have been a very straightforward trade today in 2025. But back in 1968, led to one of the most convoluted trades that you've probably never heard of. Because step one for the Saints was putting Wood on waivers and letting him go. Step two for the Saints was to inform literally every other team in football that he was intended for New York, and that this move was made with the idea that he would wind up playing for the Giants again. This meant that the Saints had to call every team and say to them, hey, listen, we just put Gary Wood on waivers, but we really don't want you to pick him up. If you could do us a solid and just leave him there, that'd be great. Wood was still pretty young, as he was 26 years old. Wood wasn't good by any means, as we saw, but he had his moments, and it wasn't unrealistic for teams to view Wood as a viable second or third string option. If even one team said, oh, look at that, Gary Wood's on waivers and we can get him, so let's do it, then the Saints would have let Gary Wood walk for absolutely nothing, and the trade would be thwarted. If a rival of the Saints, knowing what was going on, wanted to screw them over, knowing that the Saints would likely be getting some pretty good draft capital and some pretty good compensation if this trade that wasn't really a trade went through, they absolutely could have, and nothing could be done about it. The Saints were crossing their fingers, hoping that no one would pick Wood up, meaning that he would go to the Giants as a free agent, they would get a draft pick, and the trade would be complete. And amazingly enough, that's exactly what happened. Because no one signed Gary Wood. The other teams complied with the Saints' wishes, whether it was out of kindness or out of the fact that they didn't believe that this man right here was any good, or out of the fact that they didn't have room for him on their team. And because of this, Gary Wood was once again a member of the New York Giants. After one season in New Orleans, Gary Wood was back in the Big Apple, with the Giants giving a 5th-round pick in the 1969 NFL-AFL combined draft to the Saints in return. For the record, that pick turned out to be offensive lineman Heath Christensen, who never played a single snap with the Saints and never played a single down in the NFL. So it's not like the Saints did anything with this bizarre trade. And I can't even say that this trade worked out for either party, as this trade is notable for how bizarre it was, not necessarily for what came out of it. Because while the Saints didn't get a good player in return, neither did the Giants, as during the 1968 season, Gary Wood went 9 for 24 off the bench, completing just 37% of his passes for no touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and a passer rating of 15.1, which is worse if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. When 20% of your passes are getting picked off, that is really bad. For some perspective on just how bad Gary Wood was in 1968, there were 35 quarterbacks in the NFL that season to attempt more than 15 passes. Of those 35 quarterbacks, Gary Wood ranked 34th in passer rating. And of the 33 quarterbacks to attempt at least 20 passes that season, Wood was the only one who did not throw a touchdown. Gary Wood would not survive the NFL-AFL merger. The Giants gave up a 5th-round pick for a bad player, and the Saints turned around and did nothing with that 5th-round pick. So all of that confusion and convoluted nonsense with this trade turned out to be for absolutely nothing. Today, a trade like the one involving the man you've been watching this entire time, simply put, would not happen. You're allowed to trade players with no restrictions based on what team drafted them. And if you like a player and want to bring him back after letting him go, you're more than allowed to do that. But it's still bizarre just how many hoops the Giants and the Saints had to go through back in the 1960s to execute what should have been a simple swap, where a player gets traded for a pick. I know there are some parts about the earlier years of the NFL that people really want to bring back, but convoluted rules like this that lead to trades that aren't really trades are definitely not one of those things. Because in 1968, the trade for Gary Wood would confuse everyone. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.